The Council ordered to disarm Earth. 72 hours later, humanity repossessed 3,412 alien dreadnoughts. The first sound in the Grand Convocation Hall was a pen. Not footsteps, not climate systems cycling, not any sound that had been there the hour before. Just her pen, the particular scratch of a fountain nib on cold paper, slightly louder on the downstroke, the sound of someone writing without urgency, as if the document had already decided what it was going to say. The gallery was empty, all 1,600 seats dark. The 38-meter ceiling held the cold the way stone holds cold, completely without apology. The human delegate platform sat 1.4 meters below the main floor, recessed into the pale cold stone like an afterthought, which was exactly how it had been designed. One lamp, one thermos. One woman, writing left-handed in the quiet before anyone else had arrived. The wrong thing was this: the document was already signed. She had been there since before the session opened, before the directorate clerks arrived, before the gallery filled and the broadcast relays came online. She had come in through the Eastern Service Corridor, sat down at the table 1 meter below the main floor, and signed a document that had not yet been officially presented to her. The directorate clerk came in at 7 in the morning and found it sitting there, complete, dated, witnessed by her own hand. He looked at it for a moment. He filed it under routine ACKNOWLEDGMENT. He would think about that decision for the rest of his career, though he would not understand why for quite some time. At 8:15, the Grand Convocation Hall filled. The decree was read into the galactic record at 8:17. It went out on 47 communication bands simultaneously, reaching an estimated 3.1 billion beings across 61 star systems. The language was formal and civil. The meaning was not: humanity, all compact designated transit nodes, all registered supply routes, all flag-bearing vessels operating under human administrative authority, was subject to immediate supply restriction, effective upon broadcast. 72 hours to submit to a full administrative review of all human defense infrastructure. 72 hours to open everything up, lay it flat, and let the Halveth Convocation and the Orenic Directorate look inside. 3.1 billion beings watched a species get publicly told to disarm. The woman at the table below the main floor listened to the full reading. She did not move. She did not look at the gallery. When the decree concluded, she said 4 words into the chamber's open record, collected her thermos, and walked out through the Eastern Service Corridor. The gallery watched her go. Not one of them understood what they had just watched. That folder took 29 years to fill. You'll want to stay for what happens when she opens it. The orange margin smelled of recycled air and chamomile. It was a converted atmospheric survey tender civilian registration, running at 0.3 standard cruise speed, 4 light towers from the hall. It had been a specimen processing vessel once. The equipment was long gone, but the shape of the interior remembered it. 7 workstations arranged where the sample racks used to be, a common table bolted to the deck at the center, a communications rack fixed to what had been the specimen intake wall. Someone had at some point hung a single strip of lighting that was slightly warmer than the ship's standard output. Nobody had commented on it. Nobody had taken it down. Marin Call was at his workstation with his 7th coffee of the day going cold beside his right hand. He was 63 years old and had the posture of a man who had been working at a desk since before the Compact's current registry framework existed, which was accurate. On his monitor, beside the column of surety calculations he was running, he kept a small framed photograph. It was a harbor city, white buildings, a blue bay, a long stone breakwater. It was not a city he had ever been to. It was a city his grandfather had described to him once, slowly from memory, the way you describe something you are not sure you will see again. Marin had never found it. He had come close once to buying a transit pass. He had not bought it. The photograph was the closest he had gotten. Dr. Senvoth sat to his left, reading her own annotations. She had gone through the registry framework in 6 languages over the past 11 years. The 7th language she had invented herself, a precision shorthand that mapped legal conditions onto a single symbol each, so she could scan 50 pages of framework text in the time it took someone else to find the right section. She did not consider this unusual. She also did not consider it worth explaining. Commander Davin Relk, the only person on the ship with a military title, had a handwritten list in front of him. The list had 12 items on it. 11 were crossed off. The remaining item read, wait. He had been staring at it for 4 hours. Usan Oral had made a cup of tea. It sat untouched beside her communications console, still steaming faintly. She made a cup at the start of every significant event. Whether she drank it afterward depended on how the event went. She had not told anyone this. It was simply something she did. Pelnareth was at his station updating the surety ledger. He had worn the same dark gray practical jacket for 11 years. When it wore out, he ordered an identical one and switched them over on a weekend. No one had ever noticed the change. His pen moved in short, unhurried strokes as he added the final 12 entries. And Osrekin, 27 years old, the youngest person on the ship by a margin of 15 years, was cross-referencing page 3991 of the registry framework against the certified archive copy. This was the 14th time he had done it. He knew it was correct. He had known it was correct since the third cross-reference. He was checking again because the work required it, and Osrekin did what the work required. Tesli Orandrav sat at the common table and did nothing. This was for her the hardest part. She was the lead envoy permanent, which was the title the compact gave to people who were going to be somewhere for a very long time and needed the word permanent in their title so other diplomatic services understood they were not going away. She had been a trade finance arbitrator before this. 22 years in compact peripheral law, arguing cases in chambers that smelled of stale recycled air and quiet desperation. She had not raised her voice in a formal proceeding in 14 years. She was not sure she remembered how. She kept the pen in her breast pocket when she wasn't using it. It was a fountain pen she had refilled herself from the same glass bottle of dark blue ink for 19 years. She held it loosely between signatures and tightly when she was reading something that troubled her. The people who worked with her long enough learned to watch the grip. She was not holding the pen right now. She was sitting at the table with both hands flat on its surface, looking at the far wall of the ship and not doing anything at all. Marin looked up from his calculations. "Anyone want coffee?" he asked. Nobody answered. Usin reached across without looking, picked up the pot and poured a cup. She set it in front of Marin. He looked at it. He drank it. This had happened before, not exactly this, not this room, not always this hour, not always Usin who poured it. But the shape of it. 7 people in a small space with a thing that was either going to work or wasn't, and nobody speaking because there was nothing left to say that the work hadn't already said. It had happened roughly 400 times over 29 years, in various configurations, in various ships and stations and archive sublevels, and the back rooms of filing offices that didn't exist in any directorate record. Tesli could hear, faintly through the hull, the ship's environmental processors cycling. It was the wrong sound. The right sound was back in that chamber, the pen on the cold stone desk, the scratch of it in the empty hall before anyone arrived. She had been hearing that sound in her sleep for 3 years. Some nights she thought it was the only sound that made sense to her anymore. She put her hands in her lap. The founding clause, she said, to no one in particular, was 214 words. Nobody looked up. They had all heard this before. That was the point. It appeared on page 3991 of the registry framework. It had been reviewed by 4 directorate legal scholars in 29 years. She paused. None of them read past the section header. Osrekin placed the cross-referenced page face down on his desk. He did not pick it up again. The first person outside the team to read the full filing was Elder Voskon. She was Suri, one of 3 convocation-appointed neutral arbiters, a position that came with a title, a small office off the hall's eastern wing, and the legal authority to review any filing presented to the convocation within 24 hours of submission. She was 130 years old. Her secondary eye cluster, positioned at her temples, was usually half-lidded, which gave her the look of someone about to fall asleep. She was never asleep. She was always reading. The human filing arrived in her office 3 hours after the decree went out. It was 14,000 pages. She sat down, opened page 1, and began. This is not a metaphor. She read all of it. Cover, index, appendices, footnotes, the 17-page glossary of compact registry terminology that Senvoth had included, because she did not trust the Directorate's standard translation suite, the 6 separate amicus pre-registrations from the Peripheral Nine's Legal Standing Committee. She read it the way she read everything, once completely without skipping, because in her experience the thing that mattered most was always in the section that looked least important. It took her 6 hours. When she was done, she sat for a long time in the small office with the door closed and the room quiet. She had spent years reading human records, not the diplomatic summaries that the Directorate kept. Those were thin and careful and said almost nothing. She had read the primary accounts, the supply-run logbooks, the maintenance filings for infrastructure that had kept 11 other species operational for 17 years while humanity wasn't permitted to name what it was doing. The letters that crew members had written home from stations no one in the convocation had ever bothered to visit. Letters that understood they were being written for people who hadn't been born yet. She had understood in an abstract way that humans were patient. She had not understood until now that patience could be structural, that it could be filed, that it could sit in a legal framework for 29 years, properly indexed, cross-referenced, and witnessed, waiting for the moment when it was needed. She opened a direct channel to the Arun's margin. Tesli answered. On the Arun's margin, it was 3 in the afternoon, and Tesli was still sitting at the common table with her hands flat on the surface, waiting. You filed this 29 years ago, Voskon said. Faris filed it, Tesli said. He didn't know if it would ever be needed. He filed it anyway because that was the work. A silence, not a long one, Voskon was not the kind of person who let silences stretch past what they needed to be. How long has your team been on this ship? 11 months this deployment. The project has been running 29 years. And the man who wrote the clause died 11 years ago. He knew by then that it was complete. He didn't know if it would hold. Voskon said, "It holds." She did not say, "I will rule in your favor." She said, "It holds." Tessely understood the difference. She had been a trade finance arbitrator for 22 years. She knew what it meant when a neutral arbiter chose their words that carefully. She thanked Voskon, ended the channel, and sat back down. Nobody on the Orun's margin asked what had been said. They had watched her face. They already knew. That was 38 hours before the deadline. Within those same 38 hours, 9 species filed formal amicus legal notices with the Compact Registry Office. 9 species, no convocation seats between them, 14 populated systems, 0 military vessels of any size. They were not powerful. They had never been powerful. What they had was something that on most days was not worth much. Legal standing under Article 3 of the Compact's neutral state provisions, and 17 years of operating quietly inside human-administered relay infrastructure without anyone, including, technically, the humans, making a point of announcing it. They had not been told the infrastructure was human-administered. They had simply found it functional and continued to use it, the way you continue to use a road that works without stopping to ask who built it. They received the Halveth decree on the same 47 bands that sent it to everyone else. They read it, they consulted, and then they filed. The filing was brief, legally precise, and referred specifically to the surety instrument that a human economist had registered 29 years ago in a sub-basement office on a station that no directorate official had ever visited. She read, she sat, she called. That was Voskon. 9 species had no dreadnoughts, they had standing. On this particular day, standing was the more useful instrument. Project Drawn Meridian had a total operating budget equal to the annual maintenance cost of 1 Halveth patrol frigate. It employed 7 people. It had been running for 29 years. 29 years before the Orun's margin, in a sub-basement office on a station called Archival Relay Kessimer 4, a 34-year-old human economist named Faris Call was reviewing a compact registry framework that nobody had asked him to review. He had been in the office for 6 weeks. It smelled of recycled air with a faint metallic edge, the particular smell of air that had been filtered so many times it had lost something, though nobody could say what. The lighting was standard station white. There were no windows. There was a desk, a terminal, and 17 physical volumes of the compact registry framework, which Faris had requested from the archive because he did not fully trust the digital version and had read enough compact legal history to know why. He had found the clause in a footnote. Not a prominent footnote. A footnote on page 3991 of Volume 14, in the section covering vessel registry surety instruments, a class of financial agreement so procedurally specific that it had not been formally litigated in 60 years of compact history, because nobody had ever had reason to activate it. The clause had been written for a narrow commercial context. When the compact expanded, the clause expanded with it automatically because nobody updated the scope limitation. Nobody had thought to update it because nobody thought it mattered. It applied without restriction to every vessel registered under compact designation. It had never been activated because no registered party had ever posted surety on behalf of another party's fleet. Nobody had done this because nobody had considered it worth doing. The mechanism existed. The mechanism had always existed. It simply sat there on page 3991 of Volume 14 in a font size nobody objected to, in a subsection nobody translated into the dominant tongue, waiting. Faris Call considered it worth doing. He would spend the next 18 years making it happen, not in any way that looked like what it was. He would do it through a sequence of trade finance agreements, infrastructure loan instruments, port access arrangements, and supply guarantee contracts so routine, so procedurally unremarkable, that directorate legal staff filed them under routine, commercial, and never looked again. He would never file anything under a name that sounded like what it was. He would never raise his voice. He would never write anything down that he would not be comfortable having read aloud at a convocation session. No drama, no declaration, no move that looked like a move. He wrote a note near the end for whoever came after him. He did not know who that would be. He put it on a single sheet of paper, folded it once, and left it in the back of the center drawer of his desk at Kessimer 4. The note said, "The work is the answer, keep filing." He did not send it. He was not sure anyone needed to be told this. He had thought for 29 years that it was obvious, that the work was always the answer, that patience was not a quality a person had but a thing a person did, one filing at a time, for as long as it took. He died 11 years ago. Tesely attended the service. It was held in a small room at Kessemer 4, the same station where he had spent 6 weeks reading a registry framework nobody asked him to read. There were 9 people present, including herself. Someone had brought tea. She could not remember afterward if anyone drank it. She went back to his office to pack his things. It was a small office. It did not take long. She found the note in the back of the center drawer, folded once in his handwriting on a single sheet of paper that had been sitting there for approximately 18 years. She stood in that small office with no windows and read it twice. She put it in her coat pocket. She has carried it since. Hour 68. The Orun's margin was still running at 0.3 standard, 4 light hours from the hall. The clock on the common table read 68 hours since the decree, 4 hours left. Commander Relk picked up his pen and crossed off the last item on the list. The item had read, wait. It was now crossed off. Osrekin set down the cross-reference page. He did not pick it up again. Sen closed her annotated framework and set her invented language pen on top of it. Pelnareth completed the last entry in the project ledger, capped his pen and put it in his front pocket. Ussen's tea had gone cold on the desk beside her. She did not pour a new one. Marin was looking at the photograph on his monitor. The harbor city, white and blue, the long stone breakwater. He did not say anything about it. He had never said anything about it to anyone on this ship. He did not need to. They had all worked beside him long enough to know roughly what the photograph meant, and they had known it for years, and it did not need words. Tesely stood up from the common table. She picked up the folder, a standard gray document folder, the kind used for physical registry submissions, thick now with the weight of what was inside it. She put on her coat. She checked the pen in her breast pocket. She said, I'll be back. Nobody joked, nobody made a remark about the words or the timing or the weight of them. They were professionals. They had been professionals for a very long time. They simply watched her walk toward the ship's transfer lock, and then the lock sealed behind her, and she was gone. Relay Corridor 14 was 8 meters long. It was a service corridor off the hall's eastern wing, not the formal entrance, not the delegate corridor with its carved stone arches and the lighting designed to make everyone look like they were about to make an important decision. Relay Corridor 14 was for staff. It smelled of machine oil and old ventilation, and the particular warmth of a space that was heated by the systems passing through it, rather than by any deliberate design. The floor was a different material than the hall, rougher, cheaper, the kind of surface that didn't need to impress anyone. Tesely walked it alone. The folder was under her left arm. The pen was in her breast pocket. She had not taken it out. She had walked this corridor once before. 29 years ago, on her first day at this station as a junior trade attaché, she had taken a wrong turn looking for the archive sublevel. She had ended up in Relay Corridor 14, 8 meters of service passageway that led nowhere useful, and had stood there for a moment before retracing her steps and finding the correct route. She had thought about that wrong turn roughly twice a year since. Not with regret, just as a fact her mind returned to. The corridor she had walked by accident, the wrong door she had opened, the 8 meters of service passage that she had stood in for about 30 seconds before turning around. It had not meant anything. Most wrong turns don't. Her comm unit clicked. One voice, one line. The ledger's current. Pelnareth, he had never called her before a session. In 11 months on the Orun's margin, he had never initiated a channel to her. He updated his ledger and handed it over when it was needed, and otherwise worked in a silence so complete that she sometimes forgot, mid-session, that he was on the ship at all. The ledger's current. That was all. She stood at the end of Relay Corridor 14 and felt, for one moment, the full weight of what that meant. 29 years of entries. Every instrument filed, every agreement signed, every piece of the surety structure that Faris Call had started in a windowless office with no windows and a footnote. All of it logged, dated, initialed, and current. She pressed the comm once in acknowledgement. She did not speak. The corridor smelled the same as it had 29 years ago. She did not know what she had expected. The door to the hall was the formal one. She had gone in through the service corridor. She came out through the main eastern passage, which meant crossing the full width of the hall's outer concourse, marble floor, high arched ceiling, the sound of her footsteps carrying further than they should. The folder was under her left arm. The pen was in her pocket. She had not taken it out. Hour 71. 1 hour before the deadline. The convocation hall seated 1,600 beings. There were 1,600 beings in it. Word moves fast when a deadline is an hour away. The gallery had been dark and empty when Tesely walked out at 8 in the morning. Now every seat held something. Halveth delegates in their formal sashes, Orenic representatives with the faint bioluminescent ridges along their jawlines lit up in the particular way they lit up under stress. Observers from the 9 peripheral species seated in the back sections, with the quiet stillness of people who had filed the right paperwork, and now had nothing to do but watch. 3.1 billion beings had seen the decree go out on 47 bands. An unknown number of them were watching the live session feed right now, broadcast on those same 47 bands, waiting to see what a 72-hour deadline looked like from the inside. Tesla walked to the human delegate table. It was still where it had always been, 1.4 meters below the main floor. Recessed into the pale cold stone, designed 40 years ago by someone who had thought carefully about where to put the species that wasn't supposed to matter. She stepped down to it the way she always did, without looking at the step, because she had done it enough times that her feet knew it. She set the folder on the table and opened it. The folder held 3,412 documents. Each one was printed on certified registry paper, signed in the margins by the filing party, stamped with compact registry certification codes, and cross-indexed against 4 separate reference instruments. The original surety posting from 29 years ago, the relevant charter provision from the registry framework, the 9 amicus filings that the peripheral species had submitted within 38 hours of the decree, and the breach activation clause that the supply restriction decree had triggered when it went out on 47 communication bands 71 hours ago. Each document was a surety collection transfer notice. Each transfer notice applied to one vessel registered under Halveth Convocation designation. She placed them on the table. One stack at a time, the way you place something you have been carrying for a long time. The sound of them on the cold stone was not dramatic, it was rhythmic. It was the sound of work being completed. This took about 4 minutes. She did not rush. Grand Convener Salvathron watched from the elevated bench. He was 2.4 meters standing, which meant that even seated he was high enough above the floor to look down at the human delegate table without effort. His color plates were amber, the Halveth shade of dismissive certainty, the color he wore when he knew the outcome of a session before it began. He had 44 links on his chain sash, one for each decree he had issued without a successful challenge. His 8 limbs were arranged with great precision. Precision was what his limbs did when they had run out of other things to do. He said, "You cannot." Tessely said, "We are in full compliance with all compact obligations." She said it in the same tone she used to confirm a filing receipt, not soft, not loud, not triumphant. The tone of someone reading a line from a document that has already been accepted into the record, which was exactly what she was doing. One beat. She did not look up at him. "The supply restriction decree issued 71 hours ago," she said, "constitutes a material breach of mutual infrastructure obligations under the registry framework, Section 14, Subsection 4, Clause 9. Surety collection is the procedural remedy for breach of this type. Administrative custody of the registered vessels transfers to the surety posting party pending arbitration." She paused. "We are happy to serve as responsible stewards." Salvathron's color plates did not move. They were amber, they were going pale. Elder Voskon was seated at the neutral arbiter's bench, which was positioned equidistant between the main delegate floor and the gallery, a deliberate architectural choice that meant she was neither above nor below either party. She had been there for 3 hours before the session opened, reading. She had brought a physical copy of the registry framework. She did not look at Salvathron. She did not look at Tessely. She looked at the documents on the table. Then she spoke in the same register she used for scheduling motions. "The filing is procedurally valid." That was all. The cascade did not look like anything. That is the true thing about it, the thing that no one in the 1,600-seat gallery understood until much later. They expected something visible, a sound, maybe, or a light, or the kind of moment that looks like a moment. They saw a woman place a folder on a stone table and say 11 words. That was what they saw. What actually happened in the 30 seconds after Voskon spoke was this. 3,412 surety collection transfer notices were transmitted simultaneously to the Compact Registry Office, to the Halveth Admiralty, to the 9 peripheral species legal standing committees, and to the public galactic record. The transmissions were processed in the order they were received. Each one triggered an automated registry update. Each update generated a custody confirmation. Each confirmation went to 3 separate verification nodes. No signal, no alarm, no visible event. Just 3,412 entries updating. Salvathron's color plates completed their shift from amber to gray in the time it took him to understand that the word cannot had been, for 29 years, pointing in the wrong direction. He had 44 links on his chain sash. The 45th was not coming. No one in the gallery saw the cascade. Not a single one of the 1,600 beings present understood, in the moment, what had just happened. They watched a human woman place a folder on a table. They watched the Grand Convener go still. They watched the neutral arbiter speak 3 words in her scheduling motion's voice. Then they watched the human woman collect her folder, straighten her coat, and walk back toward the eastern corridor. No declaration, no celebration, no sound from the delegate table at all. They would argue about what it meant for years. What it meant was this: a trade finance economist named Faris Call, 34 years old, had sat in a windowless office on a station no one important had ever visited, and had found a gap in a legal framework the size of a civilization. He had spent the next 18 years filling that gap with paperwork so boring that no one who read the cover pages bothered to read further. He had done it alone mostly, until there were others to do it with him. He had done it without raising his voice. He had done it without a speech or a plan that looked like a plan or a single document that said in plain language what he was doing. He filed it because the work required it. That was what it meant. 4 hours after the session closed, Grand Convener Salvathron filed a formal procedural objection with the Compact Registry Office. The objection was rooted to the standard arbitration queue. The queue was 14 months long. The Aurun's margin was where Tessely had left it, 4 light hours out, running at 0.3 standard, smelling of recycled air and chamomile. The transfer lock cycled. She stepped through. The common table was exactly as she had left it. Ussin's tea was cold, the cup still where she had set it 4 hours ago, a faint pale ring now visible on the surface of the liquid. Marin's Harbor City photograph was on his monitor. Osrekin's stack of cross-reference pages was still on his desk, ordered by filing date, the edges precisely aligned. Nobody had moved. They had not been waiting. They had been working, Pell updating the ledger's verification log, Sen reviewing the amicus cross-reference record for any procedural gap she might have missed, Relk at his workstation with a new list that had 3 items on it. She could see that 2 were already crossed off. Marin was looking at his screen, not the photograph. He looked up when she came in. She set the folder on the common table. She did not say it worked. She did not say, "We won." She did not say anything about the hall or the gallery or the Grand Convener's gray plates or the 4 minutes it had taken to place 3,412 documents on a cold stone surface. She set the folder down and took off her coat. Commander Relk stood up. He said, "Faris Call. Just the name, full name, spoken carefully, the way you say something you want to make sure the record has right. Nothing added to it, nothing taken away." He said it once and then sat back down. Nobody added anything. He had never raised his voice. He had never made a move that looked like a move. He had filed it because that was the work, and the work was always the answer, and now the answer had landed, and he was not here for it, and that was the thing that sat in the room with all of them and did not need to be named. Pelnarathan capped his pen. He opened the project ledger to the final page. He wrote the date. He wrote a single line of text, the same kind of line he had written for 29 years, the same unhurried stroke, the same slight leftward lean. He initialed it. He closed the ledger. He did not open it again. Ussin Oral stood up from her workstation. She went to the small galley alcove at the back of the ship. She came back with a fresh cup of tea, the imported loose-leaf kind, the one whose name she had never translated for anyone. She set it in the center of the common table. Nobody moved to drink it. She did not say what it was for. She did not need to. Marin Call sat back in his chair, looked at the Harbor City photograph one more time, and quietly said, to nobody in particular, the 9 peripheral species filed their amicus notices within 38 hours. They had no dreadnoughts. They had standing, which is a different instrument entirely. On this day, it was the more useful one. Nobody responded. That was the right response. For 14 months, administrative custody of 3,412 vessels registered under Halveth Convocation designation would rest with 7 people on a converted survey tender. Technically, this made the Aurun's margin the administrative headquarters of the most powerful fleet in the Compact. Nobody aboard felt like this. What they felt mostly was that there was still work to do. The arbitration would take 14 months. The 9 peripheral species would need their standing confirmed through 3 separate registry updates. Sen had already found 2 potential challenge vectors in the Halveth objection that needed response filings within 60 days. Os had to archive the original 3,412 transfer documents in a format the Compact Registry Office could verify against its own records. Commander Relk had a new list. It had 19 items on it. Relk had said his name, Pell had closed the ledger, Ussin had poured the tea. The work did not stop. Dr. Sen Voth found her in the archive section at 3 in the morning. Tessely was at the workstation at the back, the one with the extra reading light. The one she had claimed on the first day aboard because it was positioned away from the rest, and you could hear the ship's systems more clearly from there. She had a blank document open on the terminal. The pen was in her hand, uncapped, the nib resting lightly on the first line of a physical notepad she kept beside the terminal for when the terminal wasn't the right instrument. The ship was quiet, the processors cycled at their steady rate, the lighting was low. Sen stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she came in and sat in the second chair, the one that was technically for storage, the one that always had something on it that had to be moved first. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Tessely was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone deciding whether to answer, the silence of someone choosing which part of the answer to say. "That he never got angry," she said finally. "Not once in 29 years. He just kept filing." A pause. It turned out that was the same thing. Sen did not say, "I know." She did not say, "Of course it was." She said nothing at all, which was the right answer, and Tessely understood why she had always liked working with her. "There's more work," Tessely said. Sen nodded. "I saw the challenge vectors. I started the response structure. It's on your terminal." "I know, I saw it." "A bit. Thank you," Tessely said. Sen stood up, moved the storage items back onto the chair, and went to the door. She stopped. "He would have liked this ship," she said. "I think he would have liked the smell of it." She went back to her workstation. Tessely sat for a moment in the quiet. She thought about a footnote on page 3991, a clerk who retired the following spring. A note folded once in the back of a desk drawer. 9 people in a small room at Kessemer 4, the service corridor that smelled the same as it always had. She thought about the sound of a pen on cold paper at 6:40 in the morning in an empty hall, the scratch of it carrying up through 38 meters of cold air to a gallery with no one in it yet. She uncapped the pen. The scratch of the nib on the first page of the new document was the same sound it had always been. High frequency, faintly irregular, slightly louder on the downstroke. Unhurried, unfrightened. The sound of someone starting a thing that was going to take a long time. It had never sounded like anything except work. She pressed the nib down and began.